I will just go for my own peace of mind.
She stood at the entrance of the compound she had once called home, holding the cure to a sickness that was slowly killing the very people who had destroyed her. And she had a choice: walk away or save them. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where African stories come alive, raw, real, and unforgettable. Now, let's get into this. Adaeze was not born into poverty. She was not born into suffering. She was born into a home where her mother sang at dawn and her father told stories by firelight. She was raised with the kind of love that makes a child walk tall. So when she married Obiora, the first son of the Eze-Obi family of Umana village, everyone said she was blessed. Everyone said the ancestors had smiled on her. The wedding was the kind people talked about for years. 3 days of celebration, goats, palm wine flowing from clay pots that never seemed to empty, drummers whose rhythms made even the elders rise to their feet. Adaeze danced in a red and gold wrapper, and Obiora looked at her like she was the only woman alive. But joy in this life rarely lasts without a test. The first year of marriage was warm. Obiora was kind. He brought her a day cocoyam from the farm and sat beside her in the evenings. He told her about his dreams, a bigger compound, a trading business, a name that would echo through generations. And Adaeze listened, eyes bright, already imagining the children who would carry that name forward. But the children didn't come. Not in the first year, not in the second. By the third year, the whispers had already started. You know how villages work. Nothing stays private. Every woman who entered Adaeze's kitchen and saw no small hands pulling at her wrapper, every aunt who watched her flat stomach at the New Yam festival, they all talked. And the person they talked to most was Mama Uchenna, Obiora's mother. Now, let me tell you about Mama Uchenna, because this woman is the kind of character you think you understand in the first 5 minutes, and then she shows you her real face slowly, layer by layer, and by the time you see all of it, your jaw is on the floor. Mama Uchenna had buried 2 husbands and raised 3 sons alone. She had a spine made of iron and a tongue that could strip bark from a tree. She loved Obiora with a fierceness that had no room for anything she considered weakness. And in her eyes, a woman who could not produce a child was not a wife. She was a visitor, an expensive, inconvenient visitor. At first, it was small things. A long look at Adaeze's waist during Sunday prayers, a comment during dinner about how the compound is too quiet. But then it became open, deliberate, calculated. Obiora, Mama Uchenna said one evening, loud enough for Adaeze to hear, from the kitchen, "The Eze-Obi name cannot die. You know what you must do." Adaeze gripped the wooden ladle so tightly her knuckles ached. She kept stirring the soup. Because Adaeze was not a woman who crumbled easily. She had gone to the herbalist twice already. She had drunk bitter things that made her stomach revolt. She had prayed at the stream at midnight with Mama Ekene, the oldest woman in the village, who said the ancestors heard every tear that fell into running water. She had done everything she knew to do. But still, her womb stayed silent. And then one morning, Obiora came home with Chisom. He didn't announce it dramatically. He didn't shout or fight. That was the thing about Obiora that made it worse. He was quiet about it. He sat Adaeze down, and in a voice that sounded almost apologetic, almost soft, he told her that his mother had arranged a second wife, that it was tradition, that it didn't mean he didn't love her, that she would still be respected. Adaeze looked at him for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at him. "Is this what you want?" she asked. Obiora looked away. And that look, that single moment when he turned his eyes from hers, told her everything. Chisom arrived 3 weeks later. She was younger than Adaeze by 6 years, rounder, louder. She walked into the compound like she already owned it. Mama Uchenna welcomed her like a daughter, holding her hands and leading her through every room. And Adaeze watched from the doorway of her own kitchen, feeling something inside her turn to stone. The compound changed after Chisom arrived. The warmth Adaeze had known, the small domestic peace she had built, it evaporated like morning dew. Chisom cooked with Mama Uchenna and they laughed together. Chisom sat beside Obiora at evening meals. And when Adaeze served food, no one thanked her. But Adaeze endured. She had learnt endurance from her mother, who always said that a river doesn't shout at every rock it meets. It simply flows around it. Then Chisom became pregnant, and the compound exploded with joy. There was celebration, there was dancing. Mama Uchenna ululated in the courtyard like a woman half her age. Obiora gave out palm wine to every man on the street, and Adaeze stood in her room alone and finally let herself cry. She cried until she had nothing left, and then she made a decision. Now, pause here with me for 1 second, because what happens next is where this story completely changes direction. What Adaeze did next is not what you think. It's not what anyone expected. And if you're not subscribed yet, I need you to do that now, because this channel tells stories that will genuinely shake you. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and let's continue. Adaeze left before dawn. Not because Mama Uchenna forced her out with shouting and insults that night, though that happened too. Not because Obiora stood there and said nothing while his mother called her a useless pot that cannot hold water, though that happened too. She left because she realized, standing in that courtyard in the dark, while Mama Uchenna's words rained down on her like blows, that she had been holding on to a life that had already ended. She took her wrapper, her mother's old brass bangle, a small bag of dried provisions, and she walked out of the Eze-Obi compound in the dead of night, down the red dirt path, past the mango tree where she and Obiora once sat on their first evening together, and she did not look back, not once. She didn't go home to her father's house. That's the first thing people always assume. No, she couldn't. Her father had died the year before, and her stepmother had made it clear there was no room for a daughter who had failed her marriage. So Adaeze walked. She walked until the village was behind her, until the sounds of dogs and distant drums faded, until the only sound was the wind in the tall grass and her own footsteps on the earth. She walked to the city. Now, here is where most people expect the story to slow down. The arrival in the city, the struggle, the hardship. And yes, there was hardship, real hardship. Adaeze slept in a market stall the first 2 nights, curled against a wooden post with her bag clutched to her chest. She was hungry in a way that made her dizzy. She spoke to God in whispers because she was afraid that if she spoke too loud, her pain would swallow her whole. But Adaeze had a gift. She knew plants. She had learned from Mama Ekene, the old woman by the stream, from childhood. She knew which leaves could bring down fever, which roots could ease a woman's monthly pain, which bark boiled with ginger and bitter kola could clear infection from a wound. In the village, this knowledge was background noise, useful, unremarkable. But in the city, in a crowded neighborhood where people were always sick and clinics were expensive and hospitals were even more so, this knowledge was gold. She started small. A woman in the market with a swollen leg, a child burning with fever in a nearby shop. Word spread the way it always does in tight communities, mouth to mouth, compound to compound. People began to seek her out. A man with chronic stomach pain who had spent money on drugs that didn't work. A young woman whose hair was falling out from stress. An elderly trader whose joint had swollen to the point where she could barely grip her goods. Adaeze helped all. She didn't charge what she could have charged. She charged what people could pay. Sometimes she took food. Sometimes she took cloth. Sometimes she took nothing at all and simply said, "Come back and tell me you are well." Years passed. And here is the twist, the one that changes everything. While Adaeze was building herself in the city, something was unraveling back in Umuna village, something slow and terrible and secret. Chisom's baby was born healthy, a boy. Mama Uchenna named him Chukwemeka. God has done great things. The compound was jubilant. Obiora was proud. Life continued. But the child grew, and something about him quietly unsettled Mama Uchenna. He didn't look like the Eze-Obi men. He didn't have their jaw, their eyes, the shape of their brow that was so distinctive it had been commented on for generations. Mama Uchenna told herself it was nothing. Children sometimes took after the mother's side. She pushed the thought away. Then Chisom became pregnant again and again. 2 more children followed, 2 girls, and the girls looked even less like Obiora. Still, no one said anything out loud, because in this village, some truths were too dangerous to speak. And then Obiora got sick. It came on slowly. First, it was fatigue. He was tired all the time, sleeping through mornings when he was usually up before the rooster. Then it was weight. He lost it rapidly, flesh falling from his frame like leaves in harmattan. Then came the cough, deep, rattling, relentless. The village clinic said it was nothing serious, gave him tablets, sent him home. The tablets didn't work. A healer from a neighboring town came and burned herbs and prayed over him for a week. No change. Mama Uchenna, who had never in her life showed fear openly, began to look haunted. She stopped eating full meals. She sat outside in the evenings and stared into the distance. Whatever armor she wore, whatever certainty that had made her such a formidable woman, it was cracking. Chisom, meanwhile, was in the city. That's right, she had left too. But not the way Adaeze left. Chisom had left 3 years after Adaeze, quietly, with the children and with a man who was not Obiora. The rumors had circled the village like vultures for months before anyone said anything to Obiora's face. And when someone finally did, his younger brother, Emeka, who couldn't carry the secret anymore, Obiora sat very still for a long time. Then he stood up, went into his room, and didn't come out for 2 days. When he emerged, he was a different man. Not angry, just hollow. Like something essential had been scooped out of him. That was when the illness got worse. People began to whisper about a curse, about the way Mama Uchenna had treated Adaeze, how she screamed at her in the courtyard, called her names, celebrated when she left, made it a point to tell everyone in the village that the Barren wife had been sent away. Some of the older women shook their heads and said things quietly among themselves. What you plant, you will harvest. What you do to the innocent always comes back wearing a different face. Now, here is where the story takes another turn, because this is the part nobody saw coming. Emeka, Obiora's younger brother, had kept something secret for years, something he had never told his brother, something that had eaten at him like termites in a wooden beam. He had known about Chisom before Obiora did. He had seen her in town with the other man 2 years into the marriage, and even spoken to her, actually confronted her. And Chisom looked at him with a calmness that chilled him and said, "If you tell him, I will say you came to me first, and who will your mother believe?" Emeka was younger. He was not his mother's favorite. He knew exactly who his mother would believe. So he stayed silent. For years, he stayed silent. And now his brother was dying, and the guilt of that silence was rotting him from the inside. It was Emeka who found Adaeze. He had heard about her from a cousin who worked in the city. There was a woman, the cousin said, a healer. People called her Ada Ndu, daughter of life. She worked near the Eke market in the city, and she had cured things that doctors had given up on. She was quiet, private, kept to herself, but the people who had known her help swore by her name like it was sacred. Emeka's heart nearly stopped when his cousin described her. The way she braided her hair, the brass bangle she wore on her left wrist that had never come off, the particular way she tilted her head when she listened, like she was hearing not just your words, but the thing underneath your words. He knew before his cousin finished speaking. It was Adaeze. He sat with that knowledge for 3 days. Then he got on a bus to the city. Finding her wasn't hard. Asking her to come back, that was the hardest thing Emeka had ever done in his life. She was not what he expected. He had imagined bitterness. He had imagined a woman shrunken by grief and years of struggle. What he found instead was a woman who stood straight, who looked at him without flinching, whose eyes held something he could only describe as settled, like she had made peace with every fire she had walked through and come out the other side, knowing her own worth. She recognized him immediately. I saw it in the slight pause before she spoke. "Emeka," she said. Just his name. No warmth, no coldness, just acknowledgement. He sat across from her in the small room she used to receive people, and he told her everything. He told her about Obiora's illness, about the children that they were not Obiora's,
about Chisom leaving, about Mama Uchenna, who was now old and frightened and had not left the compound in weeks because the shame of what had happened to her son had bent her back and aged her past her years. And then he told her the thing he had never told anyone, about the day he had seen Chisom in town, about the threat, about his silence. His voice cracked twice while he spoke. He didn't wipe his eyes. He let the tears fall. When he finished, the room was quiet. Adaeze looked at the wall for a long moment, and then she looked at him. "What are you asking me?" she said. "I'm asking you to come home," Emeka said. "My brother is dying. The illness, the doctors can't name it properly, but the way it presents, the symptoms, someone told me you have treated something like this before. 3 people, all recovered." He leaned forward. "Adaeze, you are the only person I know who can help him. I know I have no right to ask. I know what we did, what we allowed to happen to you, what my mother—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'm not asking you to forgive anyone. I'm asking you to help a man who is dying." Another silence. "Now, stop right here, because I want you to think about what you would do. A woman who was called Barren, shamed, screamed at in a courtyard in the middle of the night, thrown out of the only home she had built as a wife. And now, the very family that destroyed her is asking her to come back and save them. What would you do?" The easy answer is to refuse. The satisfying answer, the one that makes the most sense in a story of justice, is to say no, to turn away, to let karma finish what it started. But Adaeze was not a simple woman, and this is not a simple story. She thought about what Mama Ekene had told her years ago by the stream at midnight. She had asked the old woman why good people suffered while wicked people thrived. And Mama Ekene looked at her with ancient eyes and said, "The question is not why you suffer. The question is what you become because of it. Bitterness is a seed that only grows thorns, but healing grows something the whole village can eat." Adaeze had been angry for years. She would not pretend otherwise. She had lain awake in the city in that first terrible year, running through every insult, every dismissal, every moment she had been made to feel like nothing. She had been angry at Obiora for his silence, at Mama Uchenna for her cruelty, at Chisom for stepping so easily into a space built on Adaeze's pain. But somewhere in the years of healing other people, in the fevers she had broken, the infections she had cleared, the mothers she had helped through their worst nights, the anger had slowly transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but something like purpose, a clarity about who she was and what she was for. She picked up the brass bangle on her left wrist and turned it once, the way she always did when she was thinking. Then she looked at Emeka and said, "I will come. But understand me clearly. I am coming as a healer, not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, not as anything I was before. I am coming as Adaeze. And when Obiora is well, I will leave. No one will ask me to stay. No one will treat my presence as an opportunity to rewrite what happened. Do you understand me?" Emeka nodded. His eyes were wet. "I understand." "One more thing," she said. "Your mother. She will know I am coming before I arrive. She will have time to decide how she wants this to go." Emeka frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because I will not walk into that compound and have her shock make a scene. I am not coming for drama. I am coming to do a job. Your mother will know and she will make her peace or she won't. That is her own affair." She stood and began to prepare her things. The journey back to Umonna took most of a day. They were mostly silent on the bus. Adaeze looked out the window at the landscape she had left behind, the flat, dry stretches, then the greener hills, then the familiar red earth that told her she was close. She felt things she had not expected to feel, not just pain, but a strange, aching tenderness for the land itself, for the trees she had climbed as a child, for the specific quality of light in this part of the world at this hour. She had missed it. Even through all the pain, she had missed it. Emeka had kept his word. Mama Uchenna knew she was coming. When they arrived at the compound gate, the old woman was standing in the courtyard. She was smaller than Adaeze remembered. Time had taken something from her, that imperious height, that certainty. She stood with her wrapper pulled tight around her shoulders, and she looked at Adaeze with eyes that held something she had never once seen in them before.
Fear. Not just fear of losing her son. Something deeper. The fear of a woman who has lived long enough to understand that the things she did are still alive in the world, still moving, still carrying consequences she can no longer outrun. Adaeze walked through the gate. They stood facing each other in the courtyard, where Mama Uchenna had once screamed at her in the night. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, Mama Uchenna did something that made Emeka's breath catch. She lowered herself to her knees. In the dust of her own courtyard, this iron woman, this woman who had never apologized to anyone in her life, went down on both knees and pressed her hands together. "Ada," she said, using Adaeze's short name, the one you only use for someone you respect. "You wronged me. I wronged you in ways I cannot undo. I know you did not come back for me, but I am asking, I am begging that you save my son. And when it is done, whatever you choose, I will accept it." Adaeze looked at her for a long time. "Get up, Mama Uchenna," she said quietly. "I did not come to see you on the ground. I came to walk." She went to Obiora. He was in his room, lying on a mat, thinner than she had ever seen him. He heard her coming and turned slowly. When he saw her face, something in his expression broke, not dramatically, just quietly broke, like a wall that had been holding water for too long. "Adaeze," he whispered. She pulled a stool close and sat beside him, not reaching for his hand, not performing warmth she hadn't yet decided she felt, just sitting, close enough to observe him properly, the way a healer sits with a patient. "Talk to me," she said. "Tell me everything. When it started, what it feels like, every small thing." He talked, she listened. For over an hour, she listened to his body's story. She examined him with the careful, practiced hands of a woman who had spent years learning to read what sickness whispered. She smelled the herbal preparations others had given him. She looked at his skin, his eyes, the color of the white, the texture of his fingernails. And then she knew. It was not a curse. It was not something mystical or untreatable. It was a combination of conditions, severe malnutrition compounding an underlying liver infection that had gone misdiagnosed and untreated for too long, worsened by the emotional devastation that had disrupted his appetite and his body's basic will to maintain itself. She had seen something similar twice before. She knew exactly what was needed. She started that evening. For the next 3 weeks, Adaeze worked. She prepared compounds from the plants she had brought and from others she found growing in the bush outside the village, plants she knew since childhood, that her hands recognized before her mind named them. She made him drink things, eat specific foods at specific times, rest in certain ways. She sat with him in the evening sometimes, not always talking, sometimes just present. A calm presence in a room that had become very quiet. The village watched with wide eyes. Word spread, the way it always spread. The Barren wife had returned. The woman Mama Uchenna had thrown out in the night had come back with healing in her hands. People came to the compound gate and stood looking in. Some came to see if she would take revenge, some private, satisfying cruelty. What they saw instead was a woman working, focused, unhurried, professional. She spoke to Mama Uchenna when necessary, plainly, without warmth, but also without hostility. She accepted food she was offered and declined what she didn't need. She did not perform bitterness and she did not perform forgiveness. She simply was who she was, Ada Ndu, the daughter of life. And in the second week, Obiora sat up for the first time without help. In the third week, he stood and walked to the doorway of his room and stood in the sunlight. Mama Uchenna saw it from across the compound and pressed both her hands over her mouth, and the sound she made was not quite a word, just a sound, the sound of a woman whose greatest fear had backed away from her door. On the evening of the 21st day, Adaeze sat with Obiora one last time. He was not fully well. That would take more months, more care, that she would pass instructions to Emeka, who had turned out to be surprisingly attentive and earnest. But the crisis had passed. He was going to live.
The room was golden with late light. Outside, the village was settling into its evening sounds. Children, goats, the distant rhythm of a mortar and pestle. Obiora looked at her. His eyes were clearer now than they had been since her arrival. The hollowness was filling back in slowly. "I don't know how to," he began. "Then don't," she said, not unkindly. He was quiet. "Then I was a coward, Adaeze." She looked at her hands, at the brass bangle. "You were," she said simply. "I let her speak to you that way. I let her..." He stopped. "I told myself it was tradition, that I had no choice, but there's always a choice. I know that now. I knew it then too, and I was afraid of her, afraid of what she thought of me if I stood against her." He exhaled. "You deserved better from me." Adaeze let the words settle. She didn't rush to fill the space. She had learnt in years of sitting with people in pain that some moments needed to breathe. "I did hurt you," she finally said. "I will not pretend otherwise. What happened in this compound, what was said to me, what was allowed to be said, I carried that for years. I will not stand here and tell you it didn't mark me. It did." She looked at him directly. "But you should know something. Every person I healed in the city, every fever I broke, every life I helped hold together, I believe I became that healer because of what happened here. Because being thrown out of this place was the only thing that forced me far enough away from everything familiar to find what I was actually made of." Obiora's eyes were bright with tears. "I'm not saying it was worth it. I'm saying that I refused to let it be for nothing." She rose to leave. "Will you..." He hesitated. Is there any chance? No, she said gently. That door is not open, Obiora. What we had ended the night you looked away. But you will live, and you will be a man who knows what his silence cost. What you do with that knowledge now, that's yours to carry. She turned to go. Adaeze? She paused, but did not turn back. Thank you. Not just for this, for being who you are, even after everything, for being who you are. She walked out of the room and into the golden evening. Mama Uchenna was waiting in the courtyard. She stood up from the low chair she had been sitting on, slowly, the way old women move when their knees have started to argue with the rest of their bodies. She looked at Adaeze. He will be all right? She asked. Her voice was rough, stripped of every layer of authority it once carried. Yes, Adaeze said. Emeka has the instructions. He knows what to do for the next several months. Obiora must eat what I've written down. No alcohol, no pepper. Rest. Mama Uchenna nodded slowly. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then, I have lived a long time, and I have been proud of things I should not have been proud of. And I have been ashamed of nothing when I should have been ashamed of much. Her voice was quieter than Adaeze had ever heard it. I called you Barren. I said it like it was your fault, like it was your failure. She shook her head. Chisom gave my son 3 children that are not his, and I welcomed her like a queen while I threw out a woman who came back here and saved his life. A pause. I don't expect you to forgive me, Ada, but I want you to know, I know what I did, and I will carry that. Adaeze looked at the old woman. This woman who made her feel like nothing, who stood in this very courtyard and stripped her of her dignity in the dark. She thought of Mama Ikene's voice by the stream, about what grows from bitterness and what grows from healing. Carry it carefully, Mama Uchenna. Let it make you different. That is the only thing that makes carrying it worth anything. She picked up her bag. Emeka walked her to the road. They stood at the edge of the path where the compound ended and the wider village began. The night was coming in soft and purple. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass nearby. You could stay, he said. He said it without expectation, just as an offering. I have a life, a real one that I built with my own hands. He nodded. I know. He pressed his hands briefly. Thank you, Adaeze, for coming, for being better than we deserved. She looked at him. Of all them, Emeka was the one whose story complicated him most. A man who had been silenced by fear into a terrible complicity. A man who also, ultimately, was the one to find her, to carry the truth of what he'd done into the light.
Take care of your brother, she said. Be the man you couldn't be before. It's not too late. She walked down the red path, past the mango tree, past the compound she had once called home. The night birds were starting their conversations in the trees above her. The earth smelled of warm dust and something green underneath it, something alive. And Adaeze walked forward, the way she always had, straight, unhurried, without looking back. Not because there was nothing behind her, but because what was ahead of her was still being written, and she was the one holding the pen. Now, if this story moved you, if it said something to you about what it means to survive, to heal, to become more than what was done to you, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who was told they were not enough. Someone who was thrown out of a place they loved and is still trying to find their feet. Tell them that Adaze's story exists. Tell them what she became. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this channel exists for exactly these moments, for stories that carry truth in them, African stories told with all the weight and beauty they deserve. Subscribe, ring the bell, and I will see you in the next one. Stay rooted, stay rising.